Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving straight into some fascinating academic research that totally flips a common historical script. I mean, we're talking about a figure whose very name usually conjures up images of absolute terror. You know, the terrifying legends. But we gotta ask, was the founder of the Mongol Empire really just a warlord driven by chaos and destruction? That is exactly what we're answering today. History loves to paint him as just a barbarian, but the actual data and historical documents, well, they point to something way more complex. So let's break down this comparison. The myth says he was a savage destroyer of civilizations. And okay, yes, it's absolutely true he used a deliberate propaganda of fear. Spreading terror was actually this highly calculated strategy to get cities to just surrender, which, as brutal as it sounds, ultimately minimized the costs of a prolonged war. But the reality underneath all that, it was the mind of a visionary social architect. He was literally building a highly unified civilization out of deeply fragmented, constantly warring nomadic tribes. Modern academic research, like the journals we're digging into today, reveals that his true strength wasn't just on the battlefield. Not at all. It was actually rooted in his revolutionary social, legal, and political systems. He didn't just conquer territories, he set up long-lasting governance. To understand how he pulled this off, transforming those fragmented tribes into an integrated empire, we're going to systematically unpack the 5 structural pillars of his rule. We've got rewiring the military machine, the rise of the meritocracy, the rule of law, inclusivity, and Pax Mongolia, and finally, lessons for today. Let's jump right into pillar number 1, rewiring the military machine, prioritizing structure over savagery. So the Mongol military wasn't some chaotic horde. It was a highly streamlined, deeply rational organization. Just look at how their forces were divided. Exactly 60% were these super mobile, light cavalry horse archers, called keshik. These guys executed maneuvers that heavier enemies, like, say, European knights, literally couldn't handle. They created total disarray. Then, the remaining 40% were heavy lancers, who'd swoop in for the finishing blow. It was a perfectly balanced, finely tuned system. Even their gear was all about calculated efficiency instead of brute force. They used boiled leather backed with metal or horn, which gave them incredibly lightweight protection. But my absolute favorite detail here, the raw silk shirts. If an arrow struck a Mongol soldier, the tough silk threads wouldn't break. They'd wrap right around the arrowhead. That meant the soldier could cleanly pull the arrow out, which drastically reduced the risk of infection. They even favored curved scimitars over straight swords, because slashing is just way more effective from horseback. Talk about adaptive engineering. But his biggest flex was completely re-engineering society using a base 10 command structure, units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000. Now, this wasn't just for battlefield efficiency. This was brilliant social engineering. Before Genghis Khan, loyalty was strictly to your bloodline or your specific tribe. By deliberately mixing men from completely different tribes into these squads of 10, he shattered those old loyalties. Suddenly, you had to rely on the guy next to you to survive, forging a brand new, unified Mongol identity. Of course, you can't control vast territories without lightning-fast communication. Enter the YAM system. This was a massive logistical network of posts providing fresh horses, food supplies, and vital intelligence. Couriers could cross thousands of kilometers in record time. It kept the central government constantly hooked up to the front lines. It's basically the 13th century version of high-speed internet. Moving on to pillar number 2, the rise of the meritocracy. It was all about competence over bloodline. Genghis Khan actively dismantled the feudal aristocracy of Central Asia. There's this quote from The Secret History of the Mongols that hits the nail on the head. A true leader is one who deserves to be followed. Back then, leadership was practically a birthright. Genghis Khan took that system and tossed it out the window. Leadership had to be earned. He completely shifted society from a rigid traditional hierarchy to a strict meritocracy. If you were brave, skilled, and loyal, you got promoted. Period. Nobody cared who your parents were. Take 2 of his most legendary generals, Jebe and Subutai. They came from totally humble backgrounds. In fact, they had actually been his enemies at one point. But he recognized their strategic brilliance, forgave the past, and handed them top military commands purely based on their competence. All right, let's look at the 3rd pillar, the rule of law, bringing order to the empire. Because here's the thing, a meritocracy alone couldn't hold a massive, expanding empire together. For that, you need a universal framework. So Genghis Khan established the Yasa. Think of it as the ultimate moral constitution of the Mongol Empire. It functioned as a proto-rule of law in the nomadic world. And the real game changer? It was binding on everyone. Yes, even Genghis Khan's own royal family. No exceptions. The progressive elements of the Yasa were frankly mind-blowing for the era. We're talking equal punishment regardless of your social status, strict protection for merchants, which obviously fueled the economy. It guaranteed diplomatic immunity for foreign envoys, and, get this, it explicitly banned the torturing of war prisoners. For the 13th century, applying the law equally to nobles and commoners was a massive paradigm shift. That brings us to Pillar 4, inclusivity and Pax Mongolica, basically the first global order. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Instead of forcing everyone to just assimilate into Mongol culture, Genghis Khan used a profound strategy of inclusivity. He actually gave tax exemptions to all major world religions: Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, Taoism, you name it. He also empowered female leaders. His daughter, Alakai Beki, was appointed governor of the Uyghur region, a wild level of proto-egalitarianism for the time. And he actively recruited brilliant non-Mongol scholars, like the Khitan scholar Yalu Chukai, who became his chief advisor on economic and legal matters. All of this, the legal consistency, the meritocracy, the social inclusion, it birthed what historians call the Pax Mongolica. It was this incredible prolonged period of peace across Eurasia spanning from 1206 to 1368. Because laws were strict and trade routes were deeply protected, merchants, technology, and ideas could flow completely safely along the Silk Road. It was essentially an early form of globalization, all built on a rock-solid foundation of stable governance. Finally, pillar number 5, lessons for today. Finding unity through justice. So, what does this all mean for us today? Well, by tying a person's loyalty to shared laws and the merit of their work, rather than just strict bloodlines or tribal affiliation, Genghis Khan kind of pioneered an early version of civic nationalism. He helped birth an identity built on shared values and loyalty to a common legal order. It genuinely didn't matter what your ethnicity was. If you followed the Yasa and contributed, you were part of the empire. When we look at the pillars of modern national unity today, they closely mirror what the Mongols figured out 8 centuries ago. True national unity isn't forced through violence. It's earned. It's earned through social justice based on competence. It's maintained by the absolute supremacy of consistent laws. It requires inclusive governance that actually respects and utilizes diversity. And it demands transformational leadership that sets a real moral example. Which leaves us with a pretty provocative final thought. If a 13th century nomad born into a harsh, deeply divided tribal landscape could figure out how to unite a fragmented world through strict merit, consistent laws, and religious tolerance, what exactly is our excuse today? It's a powerful reflection on how we manage diversity and build social cohesion right now in our modern societies. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope it completely changed the way you view this chapter of history.